You might be asking yourselves, why can't General Motors meet every demand Shawn Fain is asking for? Simple answer is because we need profits to invest in our future. And if we don't have those profits to continue our investment in our plants, our people, and our products, we will be facing declining market share, an inability to fund the EV transition, and an inability to compete with a growing number of competitors right here in America.
That was General Motors Executive Vice President of Manufacturing in that video with those workers releasing that statement today. In it, he explained that their latest offer to the UAW and the union's demands would jeopardize the company's future.
It's similar to what Ford Executive Chairman Bill Ford said earlier this week. As of tonight, the UAW has no deal in place with any of the big three auto companies 35 days into the strike.
Yes, and it continues, and we continue our coverage with our experts here with us tonight to help us with that discussion. Paul Eisenstein, editor-in-chief of Headlight.News, and also former UAW spokesperson Brian Rothenberg. Thank you both.
A pleasure to be with you.
So, Paul, we'll get with you first. Just your thoughts on here we have another company saying these demands are really going to self-destruct this company.
You know, I did an industry podcast a little while ago, and that was the general consensus of the people on the podcast. The union clearly deserves raises. The workers have worked hard. The companies are profitable. There comes a point where you start to say how much damage will be done, not just by asking for too much, but by going on too long. And we're starting to be at the point where you start to say, okay, what is Shawn Fain, the UAW president, really thinking he's going to get by continuing the strike much longer? You know, it starts to get down where you're going out longer, the cost to members and to the companies get greater, and the potential benefits to the company, to the workers, get smaller and smaller.
Now, we've been hearing the big three executives say this all along, since before the strike even started. Brian, what do you think is the point of rolling out the top brass now to really drive that point home?
Well, I think it's a bit like, you know, pushing the pile when you're at the 1 yard line near the goal line, you know, and they're throwing in all the linemen to shove the quarterback over the end. It seems to be trying to get it to move. I would say this, look, there's a little bit of theater in this. I think Bill Ford even said that. This has been more personal than most negotiations, but I think that's because it's been public bargaining that it's happened there. And in the end, it is the membership and the tone of the membership and where they're at that is going to determine this. I mean, you know, I hear what Paul's saying, but you got to remember they have to vote on this contract. And yes, I'm sure it's getting tough. 35 days in. The GM strike was 40 days and 40 nights, and we're getting close to that. And it is very painful for those families. On the other hand, it is, having been in Solidarity House, having been around there, the decision is going to be made by the membership and the temperature of the members about these issues. And it doesn't matter who the UAW president is, until that temperature is there, it's not going to get resolved. But it's really ultimately the members' contract.
Paul, you have a response?
Yeah, one of the dangers I have, I absolutely agree with him. The members ultimately will make the decision. And this was, of course, the first time ever that UAW members voted directly for a president. So, you know, they have a more significant stake this time than they ever had. What's dangerous is when you have a union leader who sets such a strong tone. Remember, Shawn Fain, one of the first things he did was call the automakers the enemy. And the danger is he could wind up setting such a tone of resentment among picketers, and he could set expectations so high that even when they get what is a reasonably good compromise, it may be difficult to sell it to those members.
So, Brian, I know for you, you are saying that almost the consensus is that some of these members aren't necessarily buying, even though we're seeing the demonstrations where they're showing that this could break things down in the long run. How do you think the members will take this new information?
Well, I think they do have, first of all, they understand who runs their companies, but they also understand some of the sacrifices they've made. I think they're hearing it. I think it's colder, it's windier. I think some of the people have been, not all of them have been on strike, but some of them for quite a long while, and it's starting to wear on them. I do think the tone here is a little bit better than it is in Washington right now, even among Jim Jordan and his cohorts themselves. They're a little noisier about it. And I think in the end, there will be a contract. It will not be a strike forever, and the three companies will be standing. You know, it's uncomfortable. There's a lot of theater going on. There's some facts going on, but you give me a number, I can spin a number any way you want. But in the end, there will be a contract. This isn't like a football game. Nobody wins or loses. You both have to get there.
Paul, you mentioned the resentment aspect of all of this. A lot has been said about the CEO pay. You know, the big three CEOs make between 21 and 29 million a year. Do we expect to ever see a change in that? Of course, that couldn't fund all of the UAW demands, but would it help with some of that resentment and perception if that were changed?
I think you're right about the resentment issue. They could take their salaries down to zero, and remember this includes stock bonuses and things like that. They could take it to zero, and that would add about 50 cents a day or two for every worker. There's so many workers and they put in so many hours. But it does send a bad tone. And what's interesting is that it's not just here in Detroit with the big three automakers. It's nationwide. If you look at it, we are seeing more labor actions than we have seen probably since Ronald Reagan fired those air traffic controllers back in the 80s. We are seeing a dramatic shift in the broad sense of what workers deserve. And this is just probably the most visible. We've had big settlements at UPS, at United with the airlines, and so on. And we're going to see more big settlements across the country.
I want to ask you both quick, just in terms of someone who's been following this whole thing, the side effects of it. Once we finally do get to some kind of resolution, do you see there being aftershocks and damage that's still left behind?
Well, we know that Bill Ford has said to his own people internally, guys, we know there's a bit of theater in this, there's a lot of hot rhetoric. We have to work together with one another after the strike. Don't take it personally. But there will be other aftershocks. And one of the things we have to remember is that some of these costs are going to be passed on around the industry. First of all, consumers will have to pay more for cars, and they've already been paying a lot more over the last few years. The other thing to watch out will be what sort of impact this has on the supplier industry, and that's going to be critical.
And Brian.
Well, you know, it's not that big a percentage of the production of a car. I do think that you're never going to know how successful a contract is until about 2 years in, when they're dealing with the future contracts and other things. But I do think that in the end, all of those companies that have had these contracts are doing quite well after they've been done. And I think that part of it is the theater, part of it is getting it to move, and part of it is a little bit of the personality conflict of it. But you know what? In the end, these companies will be standing. One more thing, I mean, there are some cuts going on in the EV end, but I think that has more to do with demand. Now, it just so happens that if you cut back on it right now, it puts a little pressure on the union too. But it really has more to do with demand and how many Americans are actually buying those EVs.
All right, we wish we could keep this going, but we've run out of time. Gentlemen, thank you both.
My pleasure.